Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Social Work, SOSW, Diploma Programmes. Postgraduate Diploma in Social Work Counselling, PGDCOUN. MSW 013 Introduction to Psychological Basis of Counselling. Block-1 General Psychology. Unit 1 Introduction to Psychology. 1.0 Objectives. By the end of this unit, you should be able to define psychology and understand its nature, understand the various methods used in this discipline, and know about the different branches of psychology, its importance and applications. 1.1 Introduction. Psychology is best defined as the science of behavior and cognitive processes. We need to look at two aspects in this definition. 1. That it is scientific in nature. 2. This field is broad in scope. We can say it is concerned with virtually everything we do, feel, think, or experience. By the term behavior, psychologists mean any observable action or reaction of a living organism, everything from overt actions, anything we say or do, through subtle changes in the electrical activity occurring deep inside our brains. If it can be observed and measured, then it fits within the boundaries of psychology. Similarly, by cognitive processes, psychologists mean every aspect of our mental life, our thoughts, memories, mental images, reasoning, decision making, and soon, in short, all aspects of the human mind. 1 point to the origin of psychology and its current nature. Psychology has its roots in philosophy and it did not emerge as a separate discipline until the late 1800s. Its earliest history can be traced back to the time of the early Greeks. During the 17th century, the French philosopher René Descartes introduced the idea of dualism, which asserted that the mind and body were two separate entities that interact to form the human experience. Other philosophers, in contrast, suggested that mind can influence body and body can influence mind, a view known as interactionism, and by the end of the 19th century, many philosophers had reached the conclusion that questions about human mind could not be answered solely by means of reasoning but required careful observation and empirical approach. Thus, physiology entered the picture. During the period from 1860 to 1880, many findings led to the idea of the possibility of a scientific field of psychology. During the mid-1800s, a German physiologist named Wilhelm Wundt was using scientific research methods to investigate reaction times. His book, published in 1874, Principles of Physiological Psychology, outlined many of the major connections between the science of physiology and the study of human thought and behavior. He later opened the world's first psychology lab in 1879 at the University of Leipzig. This event is generally considered the official start of psychology as a separate and distinct scientific discipline. There were many early battles over what psychology should study. 3 different schools of thought emerged in this, and they were structuralism, which suggested that psychology should focus on identifying the basic structures of the human mind. This early school of psychology grew up around the idea of Wilhelm Wundt in Germany and was established at Cornell University in the United States by one of Wundt's students, Edward B. Titchener, 1867 to 1927. The goal of the structuralists was to find the units or elements which make up the mind. They thought that, as in chemistry, a first step in the study of the mind should be description of the basic or elementary units of sensation, image, and emotion which compose it. The main method used by structuralists to discover these elementary units of mind was introspection. Subjects were trained to report as objectively as possible what they experienced in connection with a certain stimulus, disregarding the meanings they had come to associate with the stimulus. A subject might, for example, be presented with a colored light, a tone, or an odor, and asked to describe it as minutely as possible. These experiments using introspection have given us a great deal of information about the kinds of sensations people have, but other psychologists of the time challenged the idea that the mind could be understood by finding its elements and the rules for combining them. Still others turned away from describing the structure of the mind to study how the mind functioned. Gestalt psychology. This school of psychology was founded in Germany about 1912 by Max Wertheimer, 1880 to 1943, and his colleagues Kurt Kafka, 1886 to 1941, and Wolfgang Kohler, 1887 to 1967. These pioneer psychologists felt that structuralists were wrong in thinking of the mind as being made up of elements. They maintained that the mind is not made up of a combination of simple elements. The German word Gestalt means form or configuration, and the Gestalt psychologists maintained that the mind should be thought of as resulting from the whole pattern of sensory activity and the relationships and organizations within the pattern. Gestalt psychologists argued that mental experience depends on the patterning and organization of elements and is not due simply to the compounding of elements. In other words, according to Gestalt psychologists, the mind is best understood in terms of the ways elements are organized. Functionalism suggested that the field should focus on the functions of consciousness. Functionalists, such as John Dewey, 1873 to 1954, James R. Angel, 1869 to 1949, and Harvey Carr, 1873 to 1954, at the University of Chicago proposed that psychology should study what mind and behavior do. Specifically, they were interested in the fact that mind and behavior are adaptive. They enable an individual to adjust to a changing environment. Instead of limiting themselves to the description and analysis of mind, the functionalists did experiments on the ways in which learning, memory, problem solving, and motivation help people and animals adapt to their environments. In brief, as the name of the school implies, these early psychologists studied the functions of mind and behavior. Behaviorism pointed out that only observable, overt activity that can be measured scientifically should be studied by psychology. Thichul originated with John Watson, 1879 to 1958, who was, for many years, at Johns Hopkins University. Watson rejected mind as the subject of psychology and instead of psychology be restricted to the study of behavior, the observable activities of people and animals. In addition to its focus on behavior as the proper subject matter of psychology, behaviorism had three other important characteristics. One was an emphasis on conditioned responses. A second, closely related characteristic of behaviorism was its emphasis on learned, rather than unlearned behavior. It denied the existence of inborn or innate behavioral tendencies. A third characteristic of behaviorism was its focus on animal behavior. Watson held that there are no essential differences between human and animal behavior and that we can learn much about our own behavior from the study of what animals do. Although behaviorism dominated psychology for decades, it never had things all its own way. Even when the behavioral school was flourishing, psychologists were listening to Sigmund Freud, who strongly argued for the role of the unconscious and other internal processes in human behavior and mental disorders. Another challenge to behaviorism occurred in the 1950s when humanistic psychologists argued that, contrary to what behaviorists proposed, people really do have free will. They do not simply repeat behaviors that yield positive outcomes while avoiding behaviors that produce negative ones. A basic principle of behaviorism that we will examine in Unit 3 in detail. The ultimate challenge to behaviorism and the narrow definition of psychology it proposed came from what psychologists often describe as the cognitive revolution, a renewal of interest in all aspects of cognition. This revolution had been brewing for some time, as psychologists quietly went about studying memory, reasoning, problem solving, and other cognitive processes. There was advancement in these research areas with the advent of computers. These advances in research methods were soon followed by techniques for observing activity within the brains of fully awake people as they performed various cognitive tasks. Thus, the processes that early behaviorists once thought to be unobservable, and the behaviorists' objection to studying them faded away. The study of cognitive processes is now one of the most vigorous areas of research in psychology. In short, modern psychology truly is a science of behavior and cognitive processes. It studies all aspects of human behavior, everything we think, feel, experience, or do, and is no longer restrained by the boundaries imposed on it by the various schools or ISMs which we discussed above. Research psychologists investigate the physical, cognitive, emotional, or social aspects of human behavior. Like other social scientists, psychologists formulate hypotheses and collect data to test their validity. Research methods vary with the topic under study. Psychologists sometimes gather information through controlled laboratory experiments or by administering personality, performance, aptitude, or intelligence tests. Other methods include observation, interviews, questionnaires, clinical studies, and surveys. In addition to working in a variety of settings, psychologists usually specialize in one of a number of different areas. Therefore, psychology has a very important role to play in various aspects of our day-to-day life. You will be able to understand this further when we discuss the applications of psychology. 1.3 The methods of psychology. Here we discuss how psychologists conduct research and make practical applications of their knowledge. The methods used in psychology can be broadly divided into three categories: descriptive, experimental, and statistical. Of these, experimental methods are used mainly by the research worker, whose purpose is generally to discover new knowledge. Descriptive and statistical methods are used by either research worker or the practitioner. Descriptive methods. As the term implies, in psychology it provides a description of a behavior of a person or animal. The description may be a crude one, perhaps just a few words that distinguish one bit of behavior from another, or it may be numerical, as when we assign an IQ score to a person, or it may be some combination of words and numbers. Now, let us discuss a few of the descriptive methods used in psychology. Natural observation. Naturalistic observation is a research method commonly used by psychologists and other social scientists. This technique involves observing subjects in their natural environment. This type of research is often utilized in situations where conducting lab research is unrealistic, cost prohibitive, or would unduly affect the subject's behavior. One of the advantages of this type of research is that it allows the researcher to directly observe the subject in a natural setting. The disadvantages of naturalistic observation include the fact that it can be difficult to determine the exact cause of a behavior and the experimenter cannot control for outside variables. Although more precise methods have largely superseded the method of natural observation, it still has its uses in psychology and other sciences. Systematic observation. The method of natural observation is unsystematic in the sense that the observers simply record what they see and hear without consciously selecting some events and ignoring others. This kind of observation is time-consuming. Most of the times, the psychologist is interested in the answer to some specific question and can answer the question by going about it in the systematic way. This method is known as systematic observation. The method of systematic observation is often applied in studying many practical problems, for example, in studying public opinion and the factors influencing it, analyzing the effects of advertising on consumer purchases, etc. Developing tests. Systematic observation can be made more precise and even more systematic with tests and scales. Terms like inventory, record, and questionnaire are also used. All these terms refer to some instrument for measuring some aspect of a person's behavior, abilities, aptitudes, traits, opinions, or attitudes. An instrument is developed by following many standardized steps. Once the final form of a test is decided on, norms are obtained by giving the test to a large, representative group of the kind of people it is intended. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, for example, has norms obtained from high school seniors. Thus, a psychologist can tell how any particular score compares with those of high school seniors in general. Clinical methods. Clinical psychology is the largest specialty in psychology. It is called clinical psychology because it uses clinical methods. These combine all the descriptive methods mentioned above and use them for the purpose of solving someone's personal problem. They usually begin by getting a detailed account of the person's history and family relations, commonly from interviews with the person and his or her associates, a sort of natural observation. Besides these observations, psychologists may use tests of various kinds: an intelligence test, a reading test, an interest test, a test of emotional maturity, and so on. Methods of systematic observation. From these tests and the biographical information, they try to make a diagnosis of the problem, that is, to decide what specifically is wrong, and then take steps to remedy it. The tests, the diagnosis, and the remedy vary with each individual. Clinical methods are most valuable in the treatment of individual cases. Experimental methods. The experimental methods have enabled science to take many giant leaps. In this method, the experimenter times changes or varies something, times keeps other conditions as constant as possible, and looks for some effect of the changes or variations on the thing being studied. Variables. A variable, as the term implies, is an event or condition which can have different values. Ideally, it is an event or condition which can be measured and which varies quantitatively. Variables can be classified into two: independent and dependent. An independent variable is a condition set or selected by an experimenter to see whether it will have an effect on behavior. It might be a drug administered, a method of training to a group of people. The dependent variable is the behavior of the person or animal in the experiment. A dependent variable in an experiment might be the response of a person to a stimulus, a change in behavior after a new training program has been instituted, a score on a test, a verbal report about an event in the environment, etc. The dependent variable is so called because its value depends or may depend on the value of the independent variable, the one independently chosen and directly manipulated by the experimenter. When, in doing experiments, hypotheses are formulated about the effect of one thing on another, the independent variable is the one expected to produce changes in the dependent variable. 4. Meditation training will improve the concentration of children in their studies, or smoking will lead to lung cancer. Meditation training and smoking are the independent variables, while better concentration and lung cancer, possible outcomes of differences in independent variables, are dependent variables. Controls. Another very important characteristic of the experimental method is control. In an experiment, it is important that only the specified independent variables be allowed to change. Factors other than the independent variable which might affect the dependent variable must be held constant. It would do no good to study the effects of varying an independent variable if, unknown to the experimenter, other factors also changed. In an experiment, we must control conditions which would give misleading results. To control conditions, we make the circumstances of the experiment the same for all subjects. There are several factors which could affect the results in an experiment. The experimenters should take enough care to control these factors. Sometimes it could be the attitude of the subjects towards the experiment, or it can be the way experimenters act, the way they are perceived by the subject, and what they expect to happen in the experiment are all factors that can bias the outcome. If one of them does, it is called experimenter bias. To control for such experimenter bias, we often have someone other than the experimenter assign subjects to groups. In this way, the experimenter does not know which group the subject is in, for example, whether subject has been given drug or not. This is called a blind procedure. It is also desirable, if possible, for subjects not to know which group they are in, whether they receive a drug or not. If neither the subjects nor the experimenter knows which group they are in, the procedure is called double-blind procedure. Perhaps better control can be achieved with the before and after, or within subjects, design in which subjects serve as their own controls. In this method, a baseline, normal level of behavior is established before the independent variable is introduced. The behavior after the addition of the independent variable can be compared with the baseline behavior. This before and after method gives good control over individual differences among the subjects which might affect the outcome of the experiment, because such individual differences are present both before and after the independent variable is introduced. If individual difference factors are held constant, changes in behavior must be due to the independent variable. This design is a good one to use when the independent variable does not have a long-lasting effect. Some independent variables, though, produce stable, long-term changes in behavior. For instance, suppose the independent variable is a new way of teaching children to read. If it is successful, the children will not be able to return to their baselines after the experiment is over because a long-lasting change will have taken place in them. In cases like this, the control group method would most likely be used. Statistical methods. Most of the results obtained in psychological research, whatever method is used, are in the form of numbers. In order to know what they mean and how to draw valid conclusions from them, psychologists have developed a number of statistical methods. These falls into general categories: significance of differences and correlation. Significance of differences: a result is called statistically significant if it is unlikely to have occurred by chance. The need for such a test stems from the fact that there are chance differences in scores, called sampling error. Our tests are never completely reliable, hence scores made by the same person on the same test can vary from time to time. Our controls are never perfect, so that two matched scores are never matched well enough to expect that they will give exactly the same scores. The net result is that we can expect chance variations in scores and therefore chance differences in the mean scores of the groups employed in experiments. For any given experiment, however, the statistician can compute the amount of difference between groups that can be expected by chance. First, he or she computes the variability of the scores in the different groups and then determines how likely it would be for the differences obtained by chance. The result is stated as a probability, P, that the difference obtained is a chance difference. The amount of evidence required to accept that an event is unlikely to have arisen by chance is known as the significance level. For a particular comparison between groups, he or she might compute a probability, say AP is equal to 0.01, that the difference is a matter of chance. This means there is one chance in 100 that the difference is only a chance difference. Those are pretty good odds, so the experimenter concludes that the difference is significant. In practice, p-values as poor as 0.05, that is, 5 in 100, are usually accepted as significant. Differences in odds higher than that are said to be non-significant. Correlation, another statistical measure often computed from experimental data, is a correlation coefficient. A correlation is a single number that describes the degree of relationship between two variables. Reliability and validity correlations are used in another important way in psychology to assess the usefulness of our measuring devices. Such an assessment involves first determining the reliability, then the validity of the device. Usually the device we are talking about is a test, but it can be any kind of measurement that psychologists make. Reliability refers to repeatability. It is the consistency of your measurement, or the degree to which an instrument measures the same way each time it is used under the same condition with the same subjects. In short, it is the repeatability of your measurement. A measure is considered reliable if a person's score on the same test given twice is similar. Leaving aside sampling error, if we gave the same test twice, or gave two different forms of it, to the same set of subjects, would we obtain the same scores? To get an answer to this, we do not have to give the test twice. We merely need to split the test into two parts, obtain a score for each part, and correlate the two sets of scores. The resulting correlation coefficient is known as split-half reliability. If the correlation is high, we say that the test has high reliability. That is, it measures rather accurately whatever it is measuring. For tests of intelligence, for example, we obtain reliabilities in the neighborhood of 0.90, which means they are rather accurate as psychological tests go. Validity refers what the test is supposed to be measuring. It is the strength of our conclusions, inferences, or propositions. We establish validity by correlating a test with some criterion that represents what we would like it to measure. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, for example, is supposed to measure aptitude for college-level study. Hence, to obtain the validity of that test, it is correlated with how students actually perform in college. The tests are not necessarily valid just because we think they are or think they ought to be. We must prove validity. And we do that by establishing a criterion or standard against which we correlate the test. Only when this correlation turns out to be significant and reasonably high can we say it is valid. In conclusion, psychologists mainly use three general methods. One is natural observation, which is made as systematic as possible by the development of psychological tests. Another is the experimental method, which permits independent variables to be manipulated and dependent variables to be measured. The third is statistical methods to test the significance of differences obtained and to compare correlations between variables. 1.4 Branches of psychology and its applications. Psychology can be roughly divided into two major sections: research, which seeks to increase our knowledge base, and practice, through which our knowledge is applied to solving problems in the real world. Because psychology touches on a number of other subjects including biology, philosophy, anthropology, and sociology, new areas of research and practice are continually forming, and a large number of subfields and specialty areas have developed as a result. Some of these subfields have been firmly established as areas of interest, and many colleges and universities offer courses and degree programs in these topics. Because human behavior is so varied, the number of subfields in psychology is constantly growing and evolving. There are a number of unique and distinctive branches of psychology. Each branch looks at questions and problems from a different perspective. While each branch has its own focus on psychological problems or concerns, all areas share a common goal of studying and explaining human thought and behavior. While psychological knowledge is typically applied to the assessment and treatment of mental health problems, it is also applied to understanding and solving problems in many different spheres of human activity. Although the majority of psychologists are involved in some kind of therapeutic role, clinical, counseling, and school positions, many do scientific research on a wide range of topics related to mental processes and social behavior, typically in university psychology departments, and or teach such knowledge in academic settings, and some are employed in industrial and organizational settings, and in other areas such as human development and aging, sports, health, the media, law, and forensics. We will discuss some of the major branches of the discipline and its applications. Abnormal psychology. Abnormal psychology is the area that looks at psychopathology and abnormal behavior. Counselors, clinical psychologists, and psychotherapists often work directly in this field. Behavioral psychology. Behavioral psychology, also known as behaviorism, is a theory of learning based upon the idea that all behaviors are acquired through conditioning. Behavioral techniques remain a mainstay in therapy, education, and many other areas. Biopsychology. The branch of psychology focused on the study of how the brain influences behavior is often known as biopsychology. It has also been called physiological psychology, behavioral neuroscience, and psychobiology. Cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is the branch of psychology that focuses on internal states such as motivation, problem solving, decision making, thinking, and attention. This area of psychology has continued to grow since it emerged in the 1960s. Clinical psychology. Clinical psychology is the largest specialty area in psychology. It includes the study and application of psychology for the purpose of understanding, preventing, and relieving psychologically based distress or dysfunction, and to promote subjective well-being and personal development. Central to its practice are psychological assessment and psychotherapy, although clinical psychologists may also engage in research, teaching, consultation, forensic testimony, and program development and administration. Some clinical psychologists may focus on the clinical management of patients with brain injury. This area is known as clinical neuropsychology. In many countries, clinical psychology is a regulated mental health profession. The work performed by clinical psychologists tends to be done inside various therapeutic models, all of which involve a formal relationship between professional and client, usually an individual, couple, family, or small group that employs a set of procedures intended to form a therapeutic alliance, explore the nature of psychological problems, and encourage new ways of thinking, feeling, or behaving. The four major perspectives are psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, existential humanistic, and systems of family therapy. There has been a growing movement to integrate these various therapeutic approaches, especially with an increased understanding of issues regarding ethnicity, gender, spirituality, and sexual orientation. With the advent of more robust research findings regarding psychotherapy, there is growing evidence that most of the major therapies are about of equal effectiveness, with the key common element being a strong therapeutic alliance. Because of this, more training programs and psychologists are now adopting an eclectic therapeutic orientation. Clinical psychologists do not usually prescribe medication, although there is a growing number of psychologists who do have prescribing privileges in the field of medical psychology. In general, however, when medication is warranted, many psychologists will work in cooperation with psychiatrists so that clients get all their therapeutic needs met. Clinical psychologists may also work as part of a team with other professionals, such as social workers and nutritionists. Health psychology concerns itself with understanding how biology, behavior, and social context influence health and illness. Health psychologists generally work alongside other medical professionals in clinical settings, although many also teach and conduct research. Although its early beginnings can be traced to the kindred field of clinical psychology, four different approaches to health psychology have been defined: clinical, public health, community, and critical health psychology. Health psychologists also aim to change health behaviors for the dual purpose of helping people stay healthy and helping patients adhere to disease treatment regimens. Cognitive behavioral therapy and behavior modification are techniques often used for this purpose. Comparative psychology. Comparative psychology is the branch of psychology concerned with the study of animal behavior. The study of animal behavior can lead to a deeper and broader understanding of human psychology. Developmental psychology. This branch of psychology looks at development throughout the lifespan, from childhood to adulthood. The scientific study of human development seeks to understand and explain how and why people change throughout life. This includes all aspects of human growth, including physical, emotional, intellectual, social, perceptual, and personality development. Topics studied in this field include everything from prenatal development to death. These psychologists generally specialize in an area such as infant, child, adolescent, or geriatric development, while others may study the effects of developmental delays. Educational and school psychology. Educational psychology is the branch of psychology concerned with schools, teaching psychology, educational issues, and student concerns. Educational psychologists often study how students learn or work, directly work with students, parents, teachers, and administrators to improve student outcomes. School psychologists work within the educational system to help children with emotional, social, and academic issues. These psychologists collaborate with teachers, parents, and students to find solutions to academic, social, and emotional problems. Most school psychologists work in elementary and secondary schools, but others work in private clinics, hospitals, state agencies, and universities. Some go into private practice and serve as consultants, especially those with a doctoral degree in school psychology. They conduct psychological assessments, provide brief interventions, and develop or help develop prevention programs. Additionally, they evaluate services with special focus on developmental processes of children within the school system and other systems, such as families. School psychologists consult with teachers, parents, and school personnel about learning, behavioral, social, and emotional problems. They may teach lessons on parenting skills, like school counselors, learning strategies, and other skills related to school mental health. In addition, they explain test results to parents and students. They provide individual, group, and in some cases family counseling. Experimental psychology. Experimental psychology is the branch of psychology that utilizes scientific methods to research the brain and behavior. Many of these techniques are also used by other areas in psychology to conduct research on everything from childhood development to social issues. Forensic psychology is a specialty area that deals with issues related to psychology and the law. They apply psychological principles to legal issues. This may involve studying criminal behavior and treatments or working directly in the court system. Forensic psychologists perform a wide variety of duties, including assessing children in suspected child abuse cases, preparing children to give testimony, and evaluating the mental competence of criminal suspects. Personality psychology. This branch of psychology is focused on the characteristic patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behavior that make a person unique. Some of the best known theories in psychology have arisen from this field, including Freud's psychoanalytic theory of personality and Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. These psychologists often work in academic settings as instructors or researchers. Social psychology seeks to explain and understand social behavior and looks at diverse topics including group behavior, social interactions, leadership, communication, and social influences on decision-making. They study how individual self-image and behavior is impacted by interactions with others. These psychologists often conduct research in academic setting, but others work in such areas such as advertising and government. Industrial and organizational psychology focuses to varying degrees on the psychology of the workforce, customer, and consumer, including issues such as the psychology of recruitment, selecting employees from an applicant pool, which overall includes training, performance appraisal, job satisfaction, work behavior, stress at work, and management. Some psychologists in this field work in areas such as human factors, ergonomics, and human-computer interaction. Research in this field is known as applied research because it seeks to solve real-world problems. Career counseling is another aspect of counseling closely related to industrial organizational psychology. Counselors in this field assist clients in a variety of settings ranging from schools to vocational to organization sites, to name a few. One of the main goals of the profession is to help clients realize their talents and dreams in response to a career and help them create successful job skills and then apply them to their career search. Many times career counselors act as consultants to companies, other times they work as a team in academic and career counseling capacities, and other times they work for a social service agency specifically working with people who need assistance in the job search process. Since jobs are such defining experiences for people, having the ability to gain helpful insight, tips, and encouragement from career counselors is a definite benefit. The career counseling field can only increase in popularity as people on average change jobs every 10 years, instead of 30 years ago where many people stayed with the same company the majority of their working career. Sports psychology is a specialization within psychology that seeks to understand psychological mental factors that affect performance in sports, physical activity, and exercise, and apply these to enhance individual and team performance. It deals with increasing performance by managing emotions and minimizing the psychological effects of injury and poor performance. Some of the most important skills taught are goal setting, relaxation, visualization, self-talk awareness and control, concentration, using rituals, attribution training, and periodization. The principles and theories may be applied to any human movement or performance tasks, e.g., playing a musical instrument, acting in a play, public speaking, motor skills. Usually, experts recommend that students be trained in both kinesiology, i.e., sport and exercise sciences, physical education, and counseling. Psychologists do many tasks, and psychology has many subfields. Clinical psychology, the largest single subfield, deals with research, diagnosis, and the therapy of deviant behavior. Other large subfields within psychology are counseling, experimental psychology, industrial and personal psychology, school and educational psychology, social psychology, psychometric psychology, developmental psychology, personality psychology, forensic or legal psychology, etc. 1.5 Let us sum up. Psychology is the science of mind and behavior. Its immediate goal is to understand humanity by both discovering general principles and exploring specific cases, and its ultimate aim is to benefit society. In this field, a professional practitioner or researcher is called a psychologist and can be classified as a social scientist, behavioral scientist, or cognitive scientist. Psychologists attempt to understand the role of mental functions in individual and social behavior, while also exploring the physiological and neurobiological processes that underlie certain functions and behaviors. Psychologists explore such concepts as perception, cognition, attention, emotion, phenomenology, motivation, brain functioning, personality, behavior, and interpersonal relationships. Some, especially depth psychologists, also consider the unconscious mind. Psychologists employ empirical methods to infer causal and correlational relationships between psychosocial variables. In addition, or in opposition, to employing empirical and deductive methods, some especially clinical and counseling psychologists at times rely upon symbolic interpretation and other inductive techniques. Psychology incorporates research from the social sciences, natural sciences, and humanities. While psychological knowledge is typically applied to the assessment and treatment of mental health problems, it is also applied to understanding and solving problems in many different spheres of human activity. Although the majority of psychologists are involved in some kind of therapeutic role, clinical, counseling, and school positions, many do scientific research on a wide range of topics related to mental processes and social behavior, typically in university psychology departments and or teach such knowledge in academic settings, and some are employed in industrial and organizational settings and in other areas such as human development and aging, sports, health, the media, law, and forensics. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more